Big reaction to my big opinion monologue. It's my announcement about Rishi Sunak. I've been backing him since January. In my view, he's lost the race. He's got to throw the towel in. He's got to concede the race for number 10 to Liz Truss because we urgently need a new Prime Minister. I want Liz Truss to actually set about assembling a cabinet of war in the days to come. I'd like her to visit the Queen by Friday. And I think we've got to crack on and deal with the cost of living crisis and an economic emergency, the likes of which we haven't seen since potentially the Second World War. What's your view? Mark at gbnews.uk. Unprecedented number of emails have come in on this. Martin says, Mark, I totally agree with you about Rishi, but has he got the self-awareness to listen? I don't think so, but his campaign was doomed when he was found to be plotting against Boris. Marion says, great monologue, Mark. You're right about Sunak. He looks down his nose and thinks he's so superior to the poor in this country. Someone needs to tell Rishi Sunak there's no I in teamwork. I think he would be difficult to work with, and he's got narcissistic tendencies. Finally, says Marion, I'm ready for Liz Truss, who's very down to earth and has an empathy for people. It's time to get on and crack on with PM Truss. Let's just get through a couple more because it's very important that we get your side of the story on this one. Mark says, Jill, yes, Liz Truss for Prime Minister. Let's get on with it. We need to get inflation under control. You are absolutely right, Yolette. You're completely right, Mark. We need someone to take the reins now. That must be Liz, who totally gets what's happening in the country. That's an abiding theme of your emails, is that Liz Truss is a real person and she understands real people. That's what you're saying here on email. However, there's always pushback, there's always disagreement, because my show is the home of free speech and no one gets cancelled. And this from Dorothy, who says, no, Mark, we must have the members vote to avoid any future conflict about Liz's legitimacy. Well, Dorothy, thank you for that. Keep those emails coming, Mark at gbnews.uk. In just a few minutes' time, have the British people been lied to about the migrant crisis? We'll come to that shortly, but it's time now for this. That rather fancy and expensive graphic suggests it's time for the big question, in which we tackle a major news story of the day. And tonight, the basis of our debate in the big question is the subject of my big opinion monologue, which you can catch now on Twitter at GB News. Given that he's trailing in the polls and given that we are in the midst of a major economic crisis, with the Bank of England predicting a year-long recession and 13% inflation, should Rishi Sunak now concede the Tory leadership contest in the national interest so that we can install Liz Truss as Prime Minister immediately? I personally would like her in number 10, as I've said, by Friday. Sunak's campaign wasn't going brilliantly anyway before any of this happened. Take a look.
I managed to start changing the funding formulas to make sure that areas like this are getting the funding that they deserve, because we inherited a bunch of formulas from the Labour Party that shoved all the funding into deprived urban areas, then that needed to be undone. I started the work of undoing that.
I would humbly suggest that video was the nail in the coffin. Well, to debate this, should Rishi Sunak concede the leadership contest, I'm delighted to welcome Boris Johnson's biographer, Tom Bower. Of course, he's got an amazing new book out about Meghan Markle, which is an instant bestseller and a cracking read. Also, ex-UKIP MEP, broadcaster and writer Godfrey Bloom, and politics legend, former Conservative minister and shadow Home Secretary Anne Widdecombe. Anne, I've got to start with you. Should Rishi Sunak concede the race in the national interest?
No, I don't think so. There are several reasons for that. First of all, I mean, you've homed in on that gaffe with that very selective bit of video. But you could do exactly the same with Liz Truss over that nonsense about paying people less if they worked in different parts of the country. And she showed, when she just leapt at that and hadn't really thought it through and hadn't analysed it, she showed a side to her that I now want to see examined. And there won't be any chance to examine it if we simply pack up the leadership race tomorrow. That's the first thing. The second thing is this. Let's suppose Rishi did concede and Liz got in, and then we start to get a whole series of problems. People will always say, we should have had the leadership through. We might have actually seen some of this if we did. Thirdly, of course, there are people in some parts of the country who've already had a chance to see and hear the leadership candidates live in their area, and other parts of the country that haven't. they will feel pretty aggrieved. Now, as you know, I always said we should never have had a leadership election. One of the main reasons I wanted Boris to stay was that this is, as you rightly said, this is a very bad time to have, if I can put it that way, turmoil at the top, which is what we've got.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I think the potential for future problems, if you don't now see this through, could be much greater than we think. Now, as you know, I've been a very big Truss supporter, but then I started to have severe doubts when Rishi started talking about laws to guarantee freedom of speech, and Liz started talking about criminalising wolf whistling. And I suddenly thought, hang on, they're going in different directions. And actually on that one, I would be travelling with Rishi. So I also want the chance now to see this through and to question further and to get a better idea of whether my first instinct, which was pro-Truss, is right or not.
However, Anne Widdecombe, can the country wait another 4 weeks given the challenging economic circumstances that we now face?
Well, the fact is that if they were close and it was neck and neck, we'd have to wait another 4 weeks, that we are expecting to wait another 4 weeks. And quite honestly, 4 weeks, we do have a government. I mean, you may have forgotten that, but just because we don't have the new PM, we've still got a government.
They're all on holiday. Boris is on holiday.
Well, that's got nothing to do with the leadership election. I mean, your question is, should we just throw in the towel with the leadership election here and now? And I'm saying to you that I think on balance, the argument is against doing that.
Well, of course, I've got the highest regard for what Anne Widdecombe has to say on this. But Tom Bauer, I think it would be quite a redemptive moment for Rishi Sunak if he stepped aside. I think that history would judge him kindly, and I think it would guarantee him a juicy, big job in this new cabinet.
Well, I disagree with you, Mark. I'm siding with Anne on this because I think we're not picking just the new Prime Minister. We're picking the man or woman who's going to lead the Tory party into the next election. And I think that Rishi, who has not done very well in this campaign because he's not a seasoned politician and hasn't actually gone through the process of understanding gutter politics and all the rest of it, as has Liz, has learnt a lot in this campaign and has more to learn. But what I want to see is more of the hustings. I want to see a clash between the two so that we actually know that the person we choose is actually going to be able to take on Keir Starmer and win. And therefore, I think it's very good for Liz to be challenged all the time, for the holes in her argument to be exposed. And when she retreats, as she did about this levelling up wages, just see how she copes the next time she makes a mistake. So 4 weeks is nothing in terms of how long we've got to wait if Labour wins the next election. And I think it's much better to let this election, this hustings, do the cause. 4 weeks, we can wait.
However, Godfrey Bloom, the Tory party are happy to navel gaze whilst Rome burns. My viewers, real people, are going through financial hell at the moment, and all the Tories want to do is have a soap opera. And I think we should conclude that soap opera and install a new Prime Minister as a matter of urgency.
I'd be a lot happier if I'd heard some radical thought on the economy, which is point one. I haven't heard anybody for years and years and years suggest that we should cut government spending. I'm a big believer in cutting taxation, but unless we cut government spending, we're not going to be able to do that and balance the books. And it would be very straightforward to do. We spend £200 billion a year on quangos. We give £1 billion a month away in basically unaudited foreign aid. We've just given £3 billion to the Ukraine, which has nothing whatsoever to do with us. The procurement policies in the NHS are absolutely ghastly. It's politicised, and half the staff in the NHS aren't medically trained at all. So we waste fortunes in the NHS and all these other things. We could actually halve spending without sacking a single cop or nurse or doctor or surgeon. We could do that with some radical thinking, and then we could seriously cut tax and then cut regulation. And if I may just add one extra point, it is my belief that the Dover invasion of illegal immigrants is Anglo-French policy. We send the RNLI boats, we send the Border Patrol boats to mid-channel and bring them in thousands a week. Don't tell me that we can't do anything about it. How absurd. Admiral Bacon kept the Germans out in the Great War. Bert Ramsay kept the Germans out of the Channel in the Second War. To suggest we couldn't stop this by Monday, if you put me in charge, I could fix it by Monday morning with a new Dover patrol under a good admiral. The whole thing's bloody ridiculous and very, very annoying.
Prime Minister Godfrey Bloom, it's got a good ring to it, sir, and I'm sure that many of my viewers are cheering to what you've just said. But going back to your suggestion about cutting spending, cutting waste, if you go for austerity 2.0, that will impact economic growth, and we're already in recession.
No, that's absolute nonsense. You've got to understand that there are two sorts of people in the country, wealth creators and wealth consumers. Everybody in the public sector, basically, and there's 6.6 million of them, and there's 44,000 of them new civil servants in just the last 2 years. They suck out of the economy, they don't put in. We need more people in the wealth creating sector. And we must understand that. We don't understand that. It isn't getting rid of something like 1,000 quangos and 200 billion a year isn't austerity. At the moment, we can't afford all of these blasted people. There's thousands and thousands. We have something like 50 times more civil servants now than when we had the whole empire and the whole world was painted red. The whole thing is absurd. We have to get rid. And another thing, this is going to make me unpopular with some, we cannot afford index-linked pensions in the civil service. It's costing something like £800 billion a year. It's got to stop. We are squandering money. We have to stop squandering money, get rid of regulations, and support small business with the drivers of all economies globally, small businesses.
Well, those are radical thoughts, Tom Bauer, that we're not hearing from either of the candidates, as Godfrey rightly points out there. Can I ask you, Tom Bauer, you've spent a long, long time immersed in the life and career of Boris Johnson, who was an election-winning machine, deeply charismatic. Your book is called The Gambler. You said that more often than not, when he rolls the dice, he wins. Are either of these candidates up to his level? I mean, are we looking at a rather disappointing two options for PM in both Truss and Sunak?
Well, that I would agree with you. I think they're both deeply flawed and very disappointing. I'm very disappointed by Boris. I think that he has betrayed the trust of all those who looked to him to actually rejuvenate Britain, set a narrative that would win another election easily in 2024 and rebuild the country magnificently. And he let us all down. There's various reasons for that. I think his marriage didn't help. I think COVID was bad. But in the end, his character was flawed. And it pains me to say that his critics have proven to be right. And it was a tragedy that he behaved in the way he did. I cannot understand why he lied about Chapman, about Chris Pincher. I can't understand why he behaved altogether in that way. But the truth is, he was the man who could have rebuilt Britain after Brexit failed. And for that, there'll be a lot of people who trusted him and put a lot of work behind him who won't forgive him for that. But where we are, we have got, as you rightly say, two flawed candidates. Which of the two is better is hard, because all I want is a candidate who can beat Keir Starmer. And at the moment, I'm not sure that either of them can. And I think we need to hear more from them in the next 4 weeks. We need more challenging debates and more challenging questions to see who is actually more flawed than the other, rather than who is better than the other. And so, my dear, I think you're absolutely right to be impatient with it all. But I think the country's off on holidays, and we should now seek to see whether the Kay Burleys and all the other interviewers can find the holes in the two candidates' arguments, which Keir Starmer will be looking for in 2024.
And I would suggest, and I have suggested, it's in the national interest to get a Prime Minister in number 10, a new Prime Minister, as quickly as possible. I know you beg to differ, but it's also perhaps in the interests of the Conservative Party, because at the moment, these two candidates are tearing shreds out of each other. And you've got very embarrassing videos like the one in which Rishi Sunak there earlier this week proudly said he's diverting funds from poor metropolitan areas into the suburbs. It's not a good look for the Tories, and you've got 4 more weeks of this infighting.
Indeed, it's not a good look, and those of us who can remember such days would dearly love to go back, to when these things were settled discreetly at Westminster, rather than debated across television and throughout the country and all the rest of it. And indeed, it was a much quicker process as well, of course, and didn't drag out like this. So, no, it's not good for the Tory party, but what would be even worse for the Tory party would be for them to say afterwards, we weren't given a choice. We would actually have wanted to have voted for Rishi. We've got Liz. We didn't actually make that choice. And don't forget, there is still a sizable section of the party that wants to make that choice. Now, whereas if you have an election and there is a clear democratic result, that's closure. That's it. That is the choice. But you see, I think Godfrey is so right when he says that we need to be asking these questions. And for that, as Tom has pointed out, you do need the time to ask them. And that should be what is going on. By the way, I have to say, Tom, that's a magnificent book on Meghan Markle, and I blame you entirely. I stayed up reading it till 4 o'clock, and I was dead the next day.
Yes, it's even more shocking when you read the excruciating detail of how that woman's mind works and how she behaves. Highly recommended. Yeah. And the Conservative Party, the most successful political party in the history of Western democracy, the party of Winston Churchill and Margaret Hilda Thatcher, can't they do better than Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak?
The party is unrecognisable. I don't recognise this as even the party of Thatcher, never mind Churchill, never mind going back into history. It's for all sorts of reasons. I think you've got an awful lot of second-rate people in Parliament. Now, I don't think that Liz and Rishi are second-rate parliamentarians. But nor do I think that they stand out at the moment as, the sort of people that we will be talking about to grandchildren in 30 years' time or whatever it might be. So, no, I think you're absolutely right about the party. I think the standard of parliamentarian is poor. I think a lot of that has been this wretched quota business. Labour Party had all women shortlists. We had the A-list. You're trying to manipulate a parliament that is not based on raw merit and raw electioneering and appealing to the electorate, but it's based instead on identity politics. We must have women. We must have people who are gay. We must have people who are racially different. We must have this. We must have that. And that militates against merit. And the parliament that I joined in 1987 was a vastly more serious body than this one has ever been.
Predictions at this stage, Anne Widdecombe, how do you think it will play out? Who will be our next Prime Minister on the 5th of September 2022?
Well, unless something really massive happens, I think it almost certainly will be Liz Truss, according to all the polls. And I think it probably will be. But as I say, I want time, if you like, for things to go wrong. I want time for those deep questions to be asked. I want time for people to really press Liz on freedom. Because Rishi has volunteered statements on freedom. She hasn't. And when I Googled Liz Truss and freedom, all I could find was a speech about freedom abroad in other countries, persecution of minorities in other countries. No. I want to know here, are we going to be able to say what we think without fear of losing our livelihoods under a Truss government? Now, so far, I hear nothing, but Rishi has addressed that.
Tom Bower, is this debate that's happening within the Conservative Party good or bad for the country?
I think it's good for the country because I think that any debate is healthy in a democracy. I think the polls are probably exaggerating Liz Truss's lead. I think that Rishi has a lot to improve, but he's got several weeks still to do it. I think in the Sky debate a few days ago, which he won conclusively, he could replicate that. So whereas I'm not saying that I would vote for Rishi right now, I think that we're much better off having the debate because at the end of it will be a hard 18-month fight to rebuild the party, to focus its attention on governing the country, which has not been the Conservative government's focus in the last few months. And that can only be for the better, Mark. So hold off. let's let a bit more democracy, let more light shine on the candidates. We'll find out the truth about them pretty soon.
Tom Bowers, a stunning new book about Meghan Markle is out now. It's winning rave reviews. It's the top of the bestseller list. It's called Revenge, Meghan, Harry and the War Between the Windsors. Tom Bowers, thank you so much for your thoughts. Anne and Godfrey, I'm going to be very indiscreet and ask you if you'd be able to stick around over the break, because we're going to discuss the Channel migrant crisis next and the extraordinary revelations in today's Mail on Sunday. Might you be able to join us?
Yes, and it's not extraordinary, it's entirely.
Well, there you go. And not surprised. So we'll get to that very shortly. An amazing expose on the front page of the Mail on Sunday about just how many of those migrants are actually fleeing persecution. The figures would suggest a fraction of those who actually arrive here. Have we been lied to about the migrant crisis? We'll discuss that with Godfrey Bloom, Anne Widdecombe and my brilliant panel next. And later in the show, is having more than 2 children selfish? Are you willing to shower less to save water? And my Mark Meets guest is the legendary explorer Adrian Hayes, who's made it into Paddington in central London to talk to me just after 10. Catch up on all of that and much more. I'll see you in 2 minutes.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
This show's all about opinions. Let's get to yours, Mark at gbnews.uk. Aaron says, Rishi has one point that you don't throw good money after bad regarding so-called deprived areas. Well, Aaron, I think it is worth having a debate at a certain point on those remarks by Rishi Sunak in terms of diverting funds away from poor urban areas. Of course, it's very important that the poorest in our society are taken care of. That's the British way. However, it's all of our money and all of our communities face challenges, and it's important that funds are distributed in a fair and, where possible, even way. That's certainly a great debate, which we will have on a future occasion. Pamela says, Mark, I do not trust Rishi Sunak. I don't believe he's a true Brexiteer. I think Liz Truss will deliver, and with a good team around her, including Suella Braverman, Lord Frost and Kemi Badenoch, our government will go from strength to strength. I truly believe that. How about a return to the cabinet of Lord Frost? Is that enough to get your mouth salivating? Look, let's crack on now with a very big story from today's Sunday papers, in particular, the Mail on Sunday. 4 in 10 migrants crossing the Channel in small boats are from peaceful Albania, according to a leaked secret military intelligence report. It's the first time an official report has exposed how the largest proportion of those making illegal crossings appear to be economic migrants. The Royal Navy report showed of the 2,863 migrants that arrived on small boats between June the 1st and July the 12th of this year, just over 1,000, or nearly 40%, were Albanian, which hasn't had a war in 25 years. So have we been misled about the whole problem after many claimed that they're genuine refugees fleeing war-torn countries? Have the British people been lied to about those migrant crossings? Well, let's debate that with my brilliant panel, who include Laura Dodsworth, Sophie Corcoran, David Hamilton, and I'm delighted to say we continue to be joined by former UKIP MEP Godfrey Bloom and former Shadow Home Secretary and former Conservative Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. Let me start with you, Sophie Corcoran. Have we been lied to about the nature of these so-called migrants fleeing for their lives?
Yes, and we have been lied to multiple times. So obviously, the obvious lie we know is about that most of them are Albanian. They obviously haven't come from a war-torn country, so they are not asylum seekers. But the other lies that we get told in the media are as follows. They're all vulnerable women and children. No, they're not. In 2021, 90% of them were men, and they left their vulnerable women and children behind in their so-called war zones that they're somehow coming from. They tell us that they don't have documentation. Rubbish. Nigel Farage has filmed them on multiple occasions, throwing their documentation into the channel. And do you know why they do that, Mark? So they can lie about their age. It has been found that in 2021, 66% of the people that said they were children were actually not children. So all we have been fed about this entire migrant narrative has been lie after lie after lie. And while we're on Rishi Sunak, because in his video, in his campaign video about how he's going to solve the channel, he said the following phrase, "Oh, but they're all good people." How do you know that? How do you know that they're all good people if you don't know who they are, you don't know where they're coming from, and you don't know why they're here? And those sorts of sweeping generalisations are why we are in this mess. Those things saying they're all vulnerable children, you know, they're all good people. That is a lie. Yes, some of them may be good people, a lot of them, but some of them aren't. And those that aren't, Mark, shouldn't be in this country because they are a danger to young women like me. And I'm not having it anymore. I'm not having the lies. And thank God we're allowed to have this conversation. And the reason we're allowed to have this conversation is because of GB News and the impact that GB News has had, whether that be grooming gangs, COVID, the vaccinations. It is because of GB News that we and the rest of the media are finally, after years, allowed to have such a conversation, because it is a disgrace.
And also, due credit to the Mail on Sunday for this exclusive. It's a huge story. I believe that Richard Tice was also instrumental in getting that story onto the front page. So full credit to Richard as well. Laura Dodsworth, have the British people been lied to about the nature of these migrant crossings?
Well, obviously, yes, but I want to interject an important caveat at this point. That report, which was gathered by British intelligence, is new. So I don't know if historically we've been lied to. It's quite new intelligence. And the important caveat is it covers 6 weeks of data. So within 6 weeks, we know that about 40% of migrants were coming from Albania. That's not to say that I would disbelieve that that kind of percentage of the channel crossing migrants are economic migrants, but we do have to remember that does reflect 6 weeks of data. An important point that Richard Tice made in his article, which sort of echoes what Sophie was just saying, was that without wishing to tar all Albanians with the same brush, there is a risk that they could be connected to Albanian crime gangs as well, which is another important point to consider here.
It is indeed. David Hamilton, the issue you've got is that if people are discarding their mobile phones or their paperwork in the channel as they arrive on our shores, or if they cover their faces or run for the hills when they get here, it doesn't bode well, does it?
Mark, I would ask why they want to come here in the first place. Why don't they want to go to France or Germany or Spain or somewhere like that? The answer is because we are a soft touch. They're going to get more here than they will get anywhere else. We haven't got room for them. That's the problem. You know, we are an overcrowded island. Drive any day on the M25, too many cars, too many people. You know, we're not in a position to have thousands of people arriving here. In many cases, we don't know who they are. They get put up in hotels. There are people in this country who would love to be put up in hotels, who paid their income tax for years, and they're not going to get anything at all. The problem is that every time that somebody comes up with an idea, like they'll go to Rwanda, which apparently, is not so bad nowadays, it's all the do-gooders who stop this kind of thing happening. So whatever plans the government have, Priti Patel, for example, is forever saying that she's going to do something, but she never actually does anything. It's as though what she says, as though that's enough. Nothing ever happens, and we're just not in a position to take thousands more people into what is already an overcrowded island. And, that's what Brexit was about. And the reason people voted for Brexit was to stop all this immigration happening, and that hasn't happened. That has not been fulfilled.
Or at least decide who enters our country. Anne Widdecombe, you're a former Home Office Minister, former Prisons Minister. What's your view on this expose in the Mail on Sunday today?
And indeed, former Immigration Minister. And there is nothing new in this. I can't understand why everybody's reacting as if this is a great revelation. I mean, it doesn't just happen in the Channel. It is ordinary practice for people to get on planes. You've got to have documentation to get on the plane. They then lose the documentation down the plane's lavatories and anywhere else that they can, spend hours airside when they arrive, and then present at the immigration desk, claiming to have come from a destination, from an origin that nobody's got any means of verifying. And that is why, when I was Shadow Home Secretary, I said that my policy would mean that immigration officers had to actually meet the planes, because if somebody is getting off a plane that has come from Albania, they cannot say they've just come from Somalia. And yet that very basic, simple thing isn't followed through. Now, of course they're throwing their documents in the Channel. Of course they are, just like they lose them on the planes. And the whole business of trying to ascertain where people have come from is one of our biggest challenges. Quite right to say that we're a soft touch. We're the softest touch going. We haven't got national identity cards. We don't practice routine detention. They can just disappear into a flourishing underground economy, and that is what they come here to do. And there's no revelation in this at all. It's been going on for decades.
Decades, and it's got to stop. The clock's against us. Godfrey Bloom, your thoughts on this?
Well, look, I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned in the programme so far is the elephant in the room, and that is following the strategic fiscal policy of the World Economic Forum. This open door immigration policy and all this kind of thing and globalization is all part of World Economic Forum policy. And we've had a Prime Minister, the Dutch have a Prime Minister, the Canadians have a Prime Minister, the Australians and New Zealanders have a Prime Minister, who are all following the scheme of the World Economic Forum. But nobody seems ever to want to talk about it. This could easily be dealt with. But it would need to be hard, and I'd like to see either Truss or Sunak actually come out on the hustings and say, I am not going to be further sponsored by the World Economic Forum. They are, incidentally, at the moment, but that's what I'd like to hear. That could turn the whole election round.
Well, I do absolutely hear what you're saying. This rather sinister figure of Klaus Schwab is a man who's famously quoted as saying, "You will own nothing and you will be happy." I'm very concerned about these unelected technocrats who are seeking to change our way of life. Godfrey, I couldn't agree with you more, I've got to say. It's all about opinions, though.